In Rainbow Six Siege, teamwork is key, and within every team there are important roles that must be filled for the team to be successful at the highest level. So in today's video, I'll be explaining what all of these roles are to help you identify where your playstyle lands you in a team and how to improve at that role. Timestamps will be in the description for each role to aid in your viewing experience. Now let's go ahead and get into the video. Before I even begin discussing the roles, there is something hugely important that you must understand, and that is the fact that these roles aren't hugely important or set in stone in ranked. The reason for this is because you are very rarely 5-stacking or being coordinated in ranked, and because of that, these roles typically will apply less. These roles are mainly important in the tournament or comp environment of the game, and that's where all of these role definitions came from. However, the main strength of understanding these roles is that you can better narrow down your playstyle and discover yourself competitively. If you find yourself identifying with a particular role, then you can practice it and try to join tournaments or scrims under that role, and you can even start exclusively playing it in ranked with the rest of your friends. But it is still important to understand what all of these roles do and the general rule of how to play them, so that way you can better serve your team if that need arises. Now, to start off the video, we're going to be going over the roles on attack, and the first of which is the support role. Now, if you've ever heard the idea that in Siege gun skill matters very little, the reason for this is because of the support role. The support player is by definition not designed to get kills. Your entire role throughout the round should be helping your team take map control or some other important task. The operators you'll be playing when you find yourself in this role can include Montaigne, Thermite, Ace, Habana, Thatcher, and other operators like them. And your entire role throughout the round is just going to be to use your gadget to open some form of important wall or to take some important map control, and then you're going to go for the plant, because typically the support players are the ones that are going to be carrying the diffuser. This is also why in Pro League and in tournament environments, you'll see a lot of the time that the support player has less kills than the rest of his team, because his role in the team forces him into positions where he's not taking very many gunfights. Another key aspect of the support role is that they have to drone a lot. Your support player should always be on their drones within the first few minutes in the round, and they should be droning in the rest of your team. The reason why you want your support players to drone the rest of the team in is because typically their gadgets are super important, like I mentioned. You don't want to lose your operators like Thermite or Habana early in the round. So you want those support players to be helping your team take map control by droning instead of risking their life. So if you plan on playing support on attack, you need to have your call out game on point, so that way you can call out to your team effectively and quickly, and you need to be pretty good at droning, on top of the fact that you need to be able to play those support operators effectively. Now, moving past the support role, we have arguably the most misunderstood role in Siege, and that is the entry. A lot of the time, newer players, when they hear the word entry or they hear entry fragger, they immediately think that these players are just meant to get kills. This is a problematic thought process, because in Siege, the entry is not supposed to be just getting kills. The entire goal of your entry fragger is to follow the drones of your support players to take map control. Now, this does typically mean that entry fraggers will get in gunfights more often, which means that their gun skill does have to be on point, but their goal isn't just to run around the map and get kills. You typically want your entry player to be playing near your team and to be aiding your team in taking that map control. There are situations where the entry isn't doing that. For example, if you plan on doing a lurk, which is where you have one of your attacking players alt walk or crouch walk up to a position to catch the defenders off guard, that is a situation where your entry fragger may be separated from the team and not specifically taking map control, but those situations are few and far between, and entry fraggers are only going to be doing that in rare circumstances. The general rule of thumb, though, is that entry fragging operators are not going to have super important gadgets. So operators like Ash and Sophia are good examples. If they die early in the round, sure, you lose some of that soft breach utility, but it's not nearly as important as an operator like Thermite. And another thing that those operators have is that they have good weapons, which allows the entry fragger to take gunfights and have an advantage. So the TLDR is that your entry fragger is going to be taking map control for your team, following in those drones, and they're also going to be taking the first initial gunfights in a round. So to play the entry fragger role, you need to be extremely mechanically gifted, and you need to be able to make plays off the intel your team gives you effectively. Now, moving on to the flex role, this is kind of a role in between the entry fragger and the support player. Basically, what the flex role is you're just picking whatever operator your team needs. If your team notices that the defense is bringing a lot of traps throughout the game, you might want to have your flex operator go IQ. If your team decides that they want to start bringing Montaigne, you might want to have your flex operator hop on Finka, so that way they can heal away chip damage on the Montaigne, and so they can give Montaigne the additional ADS speed. There are tons of potential operators that you're going to be playing in the flex role, and that's kind of the point. As a flex player, you want to be as adaptive as possible. You want to be able to play pretty much any operator effectively, and you want to be able to switch between those operators on the fly. The flex role is probably the most difficult role to learn because of how much that goes into it, it, you have to have good mechanics, you have to be good with pretty much every operator in the game, and you have to be able to work well with your team to make the right calls on where to rotate, where to position yourself, and all those kind of things. Now move on to the defensive side, we have another heavily misunderstood role, and that is the roamer. Roamers on the defense have a very similar function to what entries have on the attack, and that is that they're supposed to hold the ground away from the bomb site and kind of slow the attackers down and waste their time. So typically entries on the attack are going to be encountering the roamers on the defense, and they're typically going to be getting in gunfights quite often. However, the main goal for the roamer isn't to get kills, just like with the entry fragger. Your main goal is to hold map control for as long as possible, waste as much time as possible, and then fall back when the pressure gets too heavy. So the main skill when it comes to playing a roamer is understanding when to hold your ground and when to fall back. Being really good at this will win your team rounds because you want to try to keep yourself alive for as long as possible. You're not trying to kill the attacker. That is an added benefit. If you can pick up some frags early in the round, that is huge, but your primary goal isn't to do that. It's to just hold your ground and then fall back as soon as the attacker starts surrounding you or applying pressure. When you're playing this role, you're typically going to find yourself on operators like Vigil, Solace, maybe even Oryx in specific circumstances. You're just going to be playing operators that have gadgets that can support you on that roam game. And they're typically also going to have good guns and some form of explosives so you can get out of a situation. Now move past the roamer, we can now discuss the support player on the defense. Now some players refer to this role as the anchoring role, and that's also fine as well. Typically when you're playing the support role on the defense, you're going to find yourself on operators like Maestro, Echo, Cade, Bandit, Mute, and other operators like that. And your primary goal as a support player on the defense is to set up as much of the bomb site as possible, use your gadget effectively, whether that be bandit tricking or just setting up your gadget around the map, and then you're just going to be playing inside of the bomb site, holding that area of the map down so that way the attackers can't just brute force the bomb site. And you're also going to be periodically hopping on your cam so that way you can call out to your roamers, because you don't want your roamers getting caught off guard. So as a support player on the defense, you do need to be good at call outs just like on the attack, and you need to be prepared to play the operators that a lot of players don't like playing. And remember, your primary goal isn't to get kills. If your anchor inside of the bomb site is getting a lot of kills, then there's something wrong with your team. Now moving past the support role on the defense, we're now going to be moving on to the flex role. Now this, just like on the attack, can encompass a lot of different things. You can have your flex players on the defense play in a soft anchoring position, which basically means you set up a deployable shield and you set up other utility in a position on the map, and then you have that player sit there and hold that ground for as long as possible. Areas like this can include rafters on Clubhouse. They can include the vending machine on console at top floor. There's tons of positions on pretty much every map that can apply to the soft anchoring playstyle, but that's not only what flex operators can do. They can also find themselves just playing in the bomb site like a normal support player. It kind of depends on what operator they're playing and what gadget they have at their disposal. Typically you'll see flex operators on the defense playing Wamai, Warden, Valkyrie, and other operators along those lines. And once again, your primary goal on the defense as a flex player is going to be the same as the attack. You want to be able to just adapt to what the enemy team is doing and pick whatever operators your team needs at that time. So if your team desperately needs a Warden because the attack is constantly bringing a Ying and a Capitao, then you need to be comfortable with switching off like the Fenrir that you were playing the previous round and swapping over directly to a Warden. You have to be comfortable with switching operators constantly and constantly adapting to what the enemy team is doing. Now, speaking of adapting to what the enemy team is doing, we can now discuss the final role and probably the most complex role in all of Siege, the IGL role. IGLing in Siege is one of the most difficult things that you can possibly do. Now, what IGL stands for is in-game leader. And what your goal is while playing the IGL role is to make calls for your team. You need to be able to, in the middle of a round, tell your team that you need to rotate to a different side of the map. You need to be able to tell your teammates where to go. And you also need to be able to make calls on the fly on the defense to change your site setups around. And an IGL is doing all of this while playing one of the other roles that I've mentioned in this video. Typically, you'll see players that are considered the IGL of their team playing support operators. And the reason why a lot of them do this is because they're going to be spending most of their time on their cameras. So they have a lot of information that they can use to then react and tell their team where to go. And also players on the support role don't really have to think as much about what they're doing in the moment. Typically a support player is just using their gadget and also droning their team in. Whereas someone like an entry fragger is going to have a lot harder of a time making calls for their team while they're also entering the building and taking a ton of gunfights. However, this isn't always set in stone, and you do need to keep that in mind. An IGL can play flex, an IGL can play entry, an IGL can play a roaming role, and they can pretty much play anything. It just depends on what they're comfortable with and what their team is comfortable with. And I would argue that the IGL is probably the most important role for any team. If you're playing at the competitive level and your IGL isn't very good, you're going to struggle because your IGL is going to be making the calls for your team. And if your team trusts in the IGL and they're following their calls and they're making bad calls, then you're going to end up losing games. So if you're playing the IGL role, you need to be comfortable with leadership and you need to be good at it. Additionally, another aspect of IGL that doesn't get talked about very much is their ability to keep the team's morale going. When you're playing the IGL role, there's going to be a lot of times where your team is down multiple rounds and you're barely crawling through the match. And a lot of the time in these games, the rest of your team's morale is just going to be completely destroyed. They're going to feel bad because they're losing, and they're going to start playing worse because of it. And a good IGL player can identify this and try to motivate his team to be in a better headspace. This also comes with leadership, which is why the IGL role is so difficult, because very few people have real leadership skills, and for an IGL you have to have that. The best way to get good at IGLing is to just play more in a team environment. And when you notice your team is starting to fumble, or you notice your team is starting to fall apart, try to take up that leadership role. If you're noticing that your team is starting to argue with each other, they're starting to fall apart, they're making wrong decisions, then try to, in the moment, just take up that leadership position and tell them, hey, let's do this, we're doing this wrong, and try to boost everyone's morale up. This will be difficult in ranked especially, but if you continue to do this in 10-mans or in ranked, you'll start to get more confident in your abilities, and eventually you can play this role in a tournament environment with an actual team. Anyways, that is going to wrap up today's video. Hopefully you found this information useful. If you enjoyed today's video, I make Siege content just like this twice a week, so go subscribe to the channel and follow me on Twitter if you don't want to miss the next upload. If you want to watch another video just like this one, I'll be popping up on your screen right now that I'm sure you'll all enjoy. I'll see you next time, friends, and peace.